Hi, I have missed you all. I have been gone for a little over a week. I've had my children, and there has been some mass upheaval and changes taking place in the world over the last week that just adds to what we've experienced over the last 5, 6 months. So I wanted to put forward a message of encouragement and positivity and offer up a contribution to the world for those of you who might be open. So, for those of you who are just first visiting, my name is Joshua Betancourt. I am an NLP practitioner as well as a student of the esoteric, spirituality, meditation. This channel is about transformation, evolution. We discuss ideas related to the mind, neurolinguistic programming, how to change beliefs, thoughts, emotions, as well as topics related to systems theory, meditation, again, the esoteric, spirituality, and awakening. Welcome to Paradigm Shifting. I think you'll find today's message valuable. So, I'm Joshua Betancourt, and thanks for joining. I appreciate your time. I know that there's a lot of places that you can be and a lot of different areas where you can give your consciousness and your focus and your attention. So, gratitude for being here and paying attention and watching. So the last week has been really strange in the world. We've experienced, some tragedies related to kind of this habituated unconsciousness and hate that has caused the loss of life for the ethnic minority, and really in humanity in general. Right? It's a serious issue related to police brutality and murder here in the United States. So we're all aware of what's going on, and I don't want to focus this talk on that topic. As I spent the last week in meditation and prayer trying to come to some sort of contribution and how I might be able to give back to the world and help with the idea of really creating true change. So that's what this talk is going to be about. It's twofold in the sense that I wanted to talk a little bit about how systemic belief and how belief is integrated into a person. And so we'll go over that, and then I wanted to talk about this idea of potentially contributing to those of you who might be open. So let's start with the idea of how a human completely integrates belief. And the reason why I think this is important is because if we understand what is driving the thought process, right? What is driving the principles and values of people who might be misguided from the perspective of segregation, from the perspective of entitlement, superiority, of racism and hate, right? If we can understand at the internal level how they come to that definition of themselves, then we might be better prepared and better equipped to help them change and realize what's taking place within them that's causing this outlook of hate and anger that is the expression of what we've seen in the last week. So let's go into that, and then we'll talk a little bit about some of these other ideas that I have that'll be helpful. So I wanted to present this idea of logical levels, and this is something that was pioneered in neurolinguistic programming by Robert Dilts, but it was in association with the study of some other psychologists who really brought to the forefront this idea of levels and um, how they impact individuals, and then the dependencies that exist from the perspective of identity all the way to the expression of that identity in an environment. So let's start with this idea of beliefs and the expression of how it comes. So really beliefs, and in this case, I think it's more along the lines of indoctrination more than anything. And indoctrination being, someone who is, whether consciously or subconsciously, forcibly made to believe a certain set of values and principles as a definition of themselves based on the information or the influence of an external stimulus or an external entity. So indoctrination is basically the idea of being able to brainwash a child from the age of 2, right, to think that the color of their skin really is the definition and the driver behind their position in life, and their kind of rights and beliefs about how they stack up in the grand scheme, or the hierarchy of value of life, right? So if we take a look at that picture and we think about indoctrination, and we think about how that is presented to a sentient being in their environment at a very, very young age, right? Within those first 5 years of development, right, is the most impactful of that individual's life, right? There was a saying somewhere, I think it was in the church, that said, give me the first 5 or 7 years of a child's life, and I will tell you the outcome of that individual. I will tell you the outcome of that person and who they become, because they are absorbing all of this information as far as how they define themselves. The reason I think this is important is because hate and racism isn't something that we're born with, right? It's a behavior and a set of beliefs that we learn because we're being taught that, right? So the process of getting to those beliefs is firstly, in the environment that they're raised in the environment that they exist in the environment that they create for themselves, right? And then from that perspective, you take a step back to understand, hey, the expression of that is the behavior. What is it that they're doing? What is it that how is it that they act upon, these identities, or these beliefs and these values and these principles that they have as far as who they are and how they express themselves in the world. So, at a point, right, at some point in the mind, they've come to this ideal of, okay, this is how I am supposed to behave in my environment. This is the change that I am supposed to cause in the world, in my experience. And we see that all over the news, right, with kind of the expression of, what's been happening, with, police brutality and, and murder, right, related to kind of these systems of structure that are put in place supposedly to protect the people. So we have the environment, and then we have the idea of behavior, right? They're taught this idea of this is the appropriate behavior. This is the way to kind of express yourself in the world based on what it is that you believe about yourself, and this entitlement and sense of superiority. So then we take a step back and we think about the ideas of capabilities, which is really the idea of, what skills and what knowledge do I need in order to be able to execute against those behaviors in that environment. And that's all about, training, right? I mean, we've seen it in the unfolding of, the way that kind of some of the world's religions, right, train their soldiers for spiritual warfare under the guise of, war is, something that is kind of supported by the greater divinity or higher power or God, or however you define that. And we see that, across the globe in many instances. And that's something that's been in place for humanity for centuries upon centuries, right? When we think about how Christianity was spread, we think about how Islam was spread, and how, even, going back to the book of Joshua in the Bible, where, there was just constant war for well, I don't know what it was, 40 years or something like that, in order to find the promised land for the Jewish people as they escaped Egypt. In any event, so we have to understand that this behavior is a systemic issue that's been in our DNA, right? Human consciousness and human expression for not just the last 100, 200 years, but for thousands of years. So these capabilities are something that we're taught in our belief systems and our daily expressions by our parents, by our uncles and aunts. And that's no different for people who believe in this idea of superiority. That's no different for these people who believe in the principles related to racism and all of the expressions of hate that we've seen in the last in this country, right, in the last 200, however many hundred years it's been. So that's the capabilities aspect. And then we take a step back and we look at kind of the values and beliefs, which are really kind of the fundamental principles of how we tend to define ourselves, right? So there's this ingrained, there's these ingrained ideas around what it means to express ourselves through our capabilities, right? How those behaviors present themselves in the world and in the environment in which we exist that are directly correlated to what it is that we believe and what it is that we value. And if we don't have true value and true belief related to those principles as far as what we think is important, then we're not going to act on those things. But as you can see, if people are indoctrinated over many, many years, right, to kind of believe this, negative systemic way of thinking about how they define themselves and how they define their environment and how their expectations related to, what their rights should be as individuals. We see how that unfolds in the expression of hate and racism and injustice and prejudice and everything that has really taken hold here in the United States and across the globe, right? Across humanity for so many years. So the value and beliefs are another step in the logical levels. And then finally, and so there's really two steps, but really when it comes down to it is kind of the identity of, who we are, behind those values and beliefs. And over time, as you take and you compress each one of these levels, right, in the consciousness of a human being, it really unfolds as the expression of who they become, right? Whether that's, being a white supremacist, or whether that's being a skinhead, or whether that's being, a spiritual leader, or whatever it is, right? Whatever, path that person has decided to focus their conscientiousness on, all of these things combined create the expression of how we perceive ourselves conscientiously and how we present ourselves to the world based on our beliefs and our values. So that process applies to everyone, right? The logical levels, whether you're conscious of it or not, has impacted who you are, how you define yourself, what your beliefs are, what your principles are, and really the expression of what it is that you choose to do, how it is that you choose to act and behave and respond to the experience that you're having. This issue, this idea and this issue, for people who are suffering from what I would think is, unconsciousness, and which is an illness in my opinion, right? It's in many ways more than just a choice that they've made. It really is this idea of, indoctrination. It really is this thing of, forcible manipulation of how the human mind can be controlled to be an expression of hate and violence. I mean, we saw it in the news the other day. There was, supposedly this police officer in Minneapolis, right, was going around in, completely blacked out in boots and a jacket with an umbrella and a hammer and just smashing windows And turns out that this guy was part of the Minneapolis police force who was basically, or supposedly, right, the guy from one of the police force who was kind of enticing this idea of, the vandalism and the destruction of this effort of rioting, right, which is, known as an agent provocateur. So that is just kind of another, it's just another expression of how powerful this process really is in the outcome of how we come to our identity, our values, our beliefs, our principles, and then subsequently how that expression presents itself in the things that we pursue as knowledge, the things that we pursue as capabilities, and then the expression of those capabilities and behavior, and then those behaviors taking place out in the environment that we live in. That process is important to understand, because for people who are ill, people who are racist and biased and want this idea of this segregated world, right, of this ideal of superiority, it's something that's been ingrained into who they are. And not to say that there's any justification behind it, because the things that I am 100% in opposition to the way that things have unfolded. If I could do away with racism, if I could do away with this inequality, if I could do away with the kind of the approach that has been taken in our government and in the way that the world operates as a whole, then I would do that in a heartbeat, right? Yes, it is a choice. Yes, they are making a conscientious choice to be this way. That's true. There's another component of the idea that this has been something that has been ingrained into who they are for a long, long time, and we need to be aware of that. So I thought that part was really important to explain and express how those logical levels affect us. So with that, let me pull up this slide, because I think that this is important or this image, because I think this is important to talk about in the sense of how to effectively enact change. So within NLP, there's these principles of how we take in information and how that information relates to how we create these beliefs and how we integrate these ideas and these sensory experiences as means of gathering intelligence in the world that we exist in, so that we can better operate and function and thrive in this in the environments that we find ourselves. So there is a process of change that you can follow. So also within NLP, as we gather this information, we kind of store it in our memory banks and use it as referential information for guidance on how we grow, how we learn, how we how we deal with relationships, how we grow a business, how basically everything that we do. So the reality is that we have the capacity to go back and alter these experiences. We have the capacity to go back and make subtle changes to some of these kind of expressions of thoughts and memories and forms internally, so that they might have a different outcome or a different expression, or basically a different stimulus response internally, so that we don't necessarily perceive the past the same way if it's something that is counterproductive or detrimental or just not conducive to the way that we want to express ourselves and be. And the way that you can go about changing it is really taking an idea of, one, the diagnosis of what are these kind of behaviors and what are these expressions of myself that are incongruent with who I am, right? And what type of outcome am I looking for? And then going through the steps of these logical levels and kind of reassessing, okay, how is it that I want to be in my environment? How is it that I want to present myself from a behavioral perspective? What skills and capabilities do I need in order to really be able to execute against that? And do I already have those? And then, taking even a step back further, okay, how do those beliefs and values that I have as an individual really contribute to the expression of what that is? And then finally, okay, who am I if I'm doing that? Right? Who am I? How do I define myself if I'm doing that? And what we need in the world right now is more people who are aligned to the goodwill and love and compassion and empathy for humanity at a grand scale. So, I am a firm believer in the sense that thoughts carry frequencies, right? If we look at kind of all the developments in quantum physics lately, and we take a look at all of the developments that are taking place from a sound therapy perspective, we know that frequency has an impact at a cellular level to the health of an individual. And although these studies are, I wouldn't say they're relatively new, right? We're coming to the point where we're more open to these ideas and the benefits of these ideas, on a grand scale, right? But as we start to, really, excuse me, take into consideration the impact that these new ideas and these new thoughts and these new discoveries really have, I think we have a responsibility, as people, to develop and utilize this for change. So, so I talked a little bit about that, and now, I guess I'll go into the idea of how is it that we can contribute. I wrote a post last night that talked a little bit about, my perception of the world and how I might be able to contribute. And that's one thing that I would urge everyone who's watching this video right now. I would urge you to think of a way that you can contribute in some form or fashion to causing change in the world as we know it. And if each and every one of us just impacts one person, right? If each and every one of us makes a commitment to impact just one person, we can slowly begin to elevate the conscientiousness of humanity, which in turn is going to have a massive ripple effect around with regards to the way that we create the reality that we live in. And I don't want this to sound like some bombastic, claim, right? There's truth behind this. There was, and I think I mentioned this before, but there was a study done in Washington, D.C. many years ago where an organization brought in, I believe it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 4,000, meditators, people who had experience with meditating, all with the idea of gathering together to bringing forward an intent to reduce, violent crime in the city of Washington, D.C. When they first started the program or the process, they went to the news media and outlet and they said, hey, listen, we think that we can reduce crime, violent crimes in the city by roughly 45%, over the course of this period of time. And everyone just laughed at them. But they knew from previous studies that that was the outcome that could be expected by this large group of people really radiating peaceful thoughts, right? Healing thoughts. At the end of the study, the police department and the local government in Washington, D.C. aligned with the study because they in fact did reduce violent crime, rape, assault, murder by 45%. And it was no coincidence, right? It's no coincidence. We can obviously see the impact that we have and that we carry from a frequency perspective emotionally, and the impact that has on the relationships immediately surrounding us. If a parent walks into a room and is feeling stressed out, their children naturally feel it. It's a natural, innate sense of ours to resonate with the frequency that is being presented to us in our environment. It's just natural. I mean, it's there, right? And we respond to that. So I think we have a responsibility to elevate our frequency as much as possible, right? And through this type of work, through whatever type of work it is that you feel that contributes to making the world a better place. I don't care if that's through comedy, through the arts, through actually going out and doing the groundwork, participating in, volunteer activities with, some of the local organizations that do good work in the community, but really just giving back in any way that you possibly can, I think is utterly important at this moment. Because there are, special interests in small groups of people who have ill intent towards the world, that have strategically positioned themselves in places to really take advantage of the systems that are in place to cause damage and harm, and then put that at the forefront of, the way that we take in information traditionally that is controlled by, again, a small group of special interests that want to essentially, right, keep us in this state of trance while they go about executing, their motives and their plans, right? We see that, the wealth is concentrated here in the United States. We see that, globally, media is concentrated to a small number of people, right? We see, and it's amazing to see how social media has evolved in the sense that now the news isn't just what we get on CNN or Fox. The news comes from people posting on TikTok and people posting on YouTube and people putting together different videos like this on Facebook. So we all have a responsibility to contribute somehow, and whether that's through our own development or through the contribution of helping humanity grow, evolve, and develop. Which leads me to my next segment of this talk, which is, I've thought a lot about, okay, how do I give back? How do I help in this process? And all I can do and all I can contribute is the things that I have learned in hopes that it might elevate someone else to understand or expand or awaken in some form or fashion. And in turn have a positive effect on the life that they experience as well as the people that they come in contact with. And at the end of the day, I think, and it's taken me a while to come to this realization, right? Because, I was and still am at points, right, so involved and engrossed in this kind of external experience. But it kind of comes down to the core of, hey, here's the purpose, right? Here is the purpose. How do we make the world a better place? And what does that mean? And for me, that is and has been through this higher realization of, making a more powerful connection to our true nature. And what I mean by that is that there are multiple planes of existence. So let's just boil this down to a rudimentary, elementary perspective, right? Essentially, we have, on a day-to-day basis, these multiple versions and expressions of who we are. And I'll break that down. There's an emotional self, right? There's a mental self, there's a physical self, there is a spiritual self. And, all of these components really contribute to the experience and the expression of who we are and what it is that we are experiencing, right? What it is that we're living through. And all of these different things, right, have an impact in the decisions that we make, the paths that we take, the relationships that we pursue, right, the ideals that we have, how we define ourselves. All these things come together as a component of, in some form or fashion, as a component of how we express ourselves and present ourselves during this thing that we call life. So, where I'm going with this is that for the most part, most people subconsciously allow these aspects of themselves to operate on a day-to-day basis without having any understanding relative to the amount of control that they have over these individual components of who they are. And the expression of really what most, of the religions have kind of proposed as this idea of making a stronger connection with all that is, or enlightenment, or however you want to define that, is really based around coming to a point where you can really understand what each of those aspects of yourself really is and how they come together to create the entirety of who it is that you are, and then being able to practice, being an expression of the most positive aspects of all of those components, right? And for many of us, our life is lost without ever really having that pursuit. For many of us, we go through life without ever really understanding the possibility of really embodying this version of yourself, this divine version of yourself. And there are, and there is, many different paths as far as how you can grow yourself spiritually, grow yourself energetically, grow yourself from the perspective of conscious realization. There's tons of books out there. Eckhart Tolle is a great teacher of mine, right? And you see kind of Deepak Chopra teaching a lot of cool things, and all of these ideals and principles that were related to Dr. King and Gandhi and Mandela, and these great leaders and these avatars that we might say who were committed to this idea of bringing about this expression of truth and divinity and love for all of humankind. Problem is that many of us have been caught just based on the way that the world has unfolded in this idea of being in a state of trance, right? Napoleon Hill talked about it in his book Outwitting the Devil, which was and the word what is it? The word eludes me right now, but it was this idea of kind of being hypnotized by life, right? Being in a state of hypnotic rhythm was what he called it, right? Which is where we are completely hypnotized by the experience, right? By whether it's media or whether it's our telephones or what have you. This hypnotic rhythm has really completely distracted us from the potential that we have of realizing the greater aspect of our true nature. So I digress. How can I contribute? In my life, there's been a really strong principle around the light body. And it's kind of this esoteric principle related to how to develop yourself internally, emotionally, spiritually, and embody those components of yourself on a day-to-day basis and be more of an expression of that. And with that, there's this whole host of benefits and this whole host of healing properties and realizations around how frequency impacts you. So what I want to do and what I want to offer up to people who are open to it, and then this is just me trying to do my part, to people who are open to it, is the idea of, hey, if it's something that you're interested in, if it's something that you think might be of benefit to you, I want to put together a group that meets on a regular basis, probably twice a week, to teach this and sponsor this work so that we might be able to realize the benefits of this for ourselves and our immediate family, but also to come together in this idea of a mastermind, a group of like-minded individuals, so that we can together have a concentrated effort on giving back on an energetic level to the world at large, to humanity at large. So that's the high level of what the idea is about. There's still some legwork that needs to be done. I need to have a couple of conversations with the creators of this, which I will do, and then kind of put together what the commitment is from you guys. I personally am not looking for anything, right? I don't want, I'm not looking for anything in return. I want to give this what I know and help in helping people to achieve this or understand this and implement this. I want to give that to the world. However, I think that just based on what this organization is, that there may be a contribution that you might have to make as far as your commitment to buying this program. It won't be money that comes to me. It won't be an investment that comes to me. It'll be something that you commit to doing. And it doesn't necessarily have to be immediately, but I got to work out the details. So in the coming weeks or so, I'll formulate these details and figure out what that looks like. But what I will say is that this idea of the light body is an evolutionary step. It is a step towards really embodying a higher sense of self, a higher frequency, and it is transformational beyond what words can express. And my hope is that we can put together a small community of people who are like-minded and interested in exploring that, and then leveraging that to have and cause change in the world. I know this was a long talk. I apologize for the length of it. I think that that this is just, my idea of how to contribute. I hope that the talk has been beneficial to you. Please share it. This is going to go up on my channel, and I'll put it on YouTube as well. Feel free to reach out to me. Anyone who's actually interested in participating in this, send me a message or hit me up and let me know that it's something that you do want to participate in, and we can start the process of building this group and figure out how to get this thing rolling and how to get this thing started. It's a small contribution that I think I can make that will help people live fuller, richer, better lives. And together, I think that we can truly have an impact greater than we understand if we can align our intentions and our emotions and our conscientiousness towards the greater good of what humanity is called for and needs at this moment. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate, again, your time. I love all of you dearly. I hope that you're well. I hope that your families are well. I know that the times are trying and times are really difficult. Chin up. Things are going to be okay. Don't fret. Stay strong, and we'll be in touch. I love you guys a lot. All right. Take care.